So, my freshman year at the University of Texas, my roommate was actually the guy who was up here last Sunday, Jeremy Edelin. And so, if you are new to Northpoint, or maybe if you just happened to miss last Sunday, be out of town, I would highly encourage you to watch back, listen back in the car. Maybe it was just one of those special Sundays, powerful messages. He was so great up here. But if you haven't ever seen him before, you don't know what he looks like. This is a very recent, I think as recent as of yesterday, picture of Jeremy. That is his son, Grayson, and him and Ashley made one of those kids that are like frustratingly cute. You know what I mean? If you didn't see last week, that's instead of enough alone, like Grayson's the hero of last week's message. So you should go and tune into that. But the Jeremy that I first met, the Jeremy that I know freshman year of college, was actually Justin Bieber Jeremy. And basically all of his facial hair was gone from here. It all came out here, right? And he was such a great roommate, honestly. Like, it was such a great living situation, at least for me. I don't know what he would say. But he cleaned up all of my clothes. He did all of our dishes. He is responsible for everything that happens in this room, right? So he's like the technology guy. To me, all of this is just magic. So we had LED strips around our room, and we had surround sound in our room. It was fantastic. And he was working at Northpoint here in Cedar Park, and he was dating Ashley at the time, who he then married. She was living in Cedar Park. So he was gone most weekends, which was pretty sweet when you're living in like a 9x9 little box dorm room, right? There was one thing that made Jeremy a little subpar as a roommate. Not a repeating thing, it was one event, and I'd like to share that event with you here today. Basically, long story short, Jeremy and I, we lived in Jester West at the University of Texas, which if you know anything about UT, it is the worst possible living scenario, right? It is the biggest, oldest, ugliest building. It looks like it's straight out of College Station or something like that. Be a pretty building there, but we got Jester, and it was at the bottom of our list, but we go in, and we go to move in that first weekend, and my mom, she's there to help. His parents are there, and we're moving all our stuff in, and my mom walks into the bathroom, and she goes, "Oh, this is a problem. Like, this is really dangerous." Now, we had a connecting bathroom, which we thought was luxury because it wasn't a community bathroom like the top floors. We had just our dorm room, connecting bathroom, and then one more dorm room, and she says, "Well, they both lock from the room side. Like, somebody can get locked in here." And like, "Mom, half the reason or more I'm going to college is to not hear you worry about me anymore. Like, we're gonna be okay. We're adults." About a month later, on a Friday afternoon, Jeremy is about ready to go to Cedar Park. I go to shower. Jeremy goes to the bathroom. Jeremy walks out of the bathroom, power of habit. He locks the door. He gets in his car. He drives to Cedar Park for the whole weekend. I get out. I do not have my cell phone. I go to the door, and I try the handle. And it was in that moment that I realized how I was going to die. It all sunk in. I mean, my stomach went from like here to here. It was minutes until I was in this like animal mode. I kid you not. I was running from one side of the bathroom to the other, launching myself airborne at this door, trying to break it down. I found a fork from a used ramen bowl, and I was scraping, and to this day, I'm sure they didn't fix it. There were scrapes all over. All the paint is gone. I removed a ceiling tile and was screaming to the floor above me, "Room 115, help!" Like, absolute panic. Finally, I sit down on the floor, and I have a genuine moment where I feel grateful that I'm locked in a room with running water. I'm like, I'm gonna sleep on this floor and stay the weekend here. About 3 hours in, I took a selfie, and this is what I looked like at the end of that time. I mean, it is genuinely what I felt. But obviously, I mean, it's a little anticlimactic because I'm here and I didn't die in that room. Jeremy's not in prison for my homicide, you know. So what happened was we had a friend coming in from none other than College Station to hang for the weekend. The only time in 4 years that this happened, so it was just wonderful coincidence for me. And it was way past when we were supposed to meet. He like sneaks in the Jester, knocks on the door, and hears me like screaming from the room. And he's like, you know, "Jordan, you in there?" I'm like, "Jared, get help, please." And the guy comes over and unlocks the door. And I mean, when that door opened, and I felt, I mean, obviously it was an embarrassing scene and setting, but I mean, the door opened and I'm like realizing I'm gonna eat that weekend. It was such an exhilarating moment. And the reason that I shared that story really is because this weekend, right? And part of the reason we're having this conversation today is because we're going to be celebrating all over our country on lakes and pools and backyards our freedom. We're going to be celebrating the most valuable foundational, or the most foundational kind of value of our country, right? And we're going to be celebrating that we have it, that we can exercise it. We're going to celebrate the men and women that have fought so that we can have it. And really, I mean, if you just take a little bit of time to reflect on that this weekend, it really is an amazing thing to be grateful for. I was thinking this morning even that in 2022, there are still over 50 countries on the planet today where what you and I are doing right now would be illegal. That we can't gather and practice our faith, certainly learn about the Christian faith. I mean, it is amazing the freedoms that we have. And I share that story because obviously it wasn't life-changing or that traumatic, but there's a symbolism in there to be like, if you have ever been trapped in a physical or a symbolic room. I mean, when I realized that that door handle was locked, it wasn't like a drip of anxiety, right? It was an immediate, like as soon as I realized my loss of freedom. Like if you've ever been in a relationship that you feel trapped in, if you've ever been in a financial scenario that you feel trapped in, a business situation that you feel trapped in, trapped emotionally or trapped spiritually, I mean, if you've ever been that, it is one of the most painful experiences. And on the flip side of that, it is one of the most exhilarating experiences to realize your freedom, to get freedom back, right? And that door opened, I mean, it was as powerful the other way around. And we looked at the calendar this year and we're like, well, July 3rd, it's a Sunday. What a perfect time to talk about freedom because the scriptures, Old and New Testament, have so much to say about freedom. But at the same time, we'll acknowledge that it is incredibly complicated to talk about because there's no universal definition. And as a result, when we don't know exactly how to define freedom, and it's been defined differently in different time periods and cultures and different political philosophies and agendas and so on, when we don't have a definition or agreed upon definition, it can be difficult to determine what leads to it. When do you have it? Can you have it? Is it even an illusion? Like, can you experience it? How do you maintain it? And so it's a complicated situation that I want to attempt to simplify a little bit because the Bible does have so much to say about it. And I think the easiest way to start the conversation is to think about freedom in the context of just two major categories. It's the easiest way we could slice up all the different types of freedoms that there are. And I would break it down into an external and an internal freedom. Right? External freedom is it's the physical world around us and the circumstances of our lives. The most extreme example would be to literally be imprisoned or taken captive. Like that would be the most extreme version of losing your external freedom. But even more that, it's the circumstances of our lives. When we aren't free to do what we want or experience what we want or aren't free in a relationship or aren't free financially, all of that is part of the world of external freedom. It's the kind of the freedom to do or to act or to go, you could say. Whereas internal freedom is the freedom to be everything that you want to be. You want to experience, to be free from perhaps things like guilt, or to be free from things like shame, free from fear or anxiety, worry, stress, jealousy, comparison, all the things that trap us, and free to experience relationships, joy, intimacy, connection, meaning, purpose. And while both are important and both are actually connected to one another, we'll talk about that a little bit at the end, I want to focus the majority of our time on the internal one. Because while the scriptures do have things to say about external, and there are things we can do to affect the external, the scriptures have a lot to say about internal freedom, and there's a lot we can do to influence our internal freedoms. I think it's still helpful to try to take a stab at a definition because it's hard to know what we're talking about if we don't have something we can at least kind of start with. And I actually think that the dictionary definition, there's so many definitions, but that one is the simplest and is the one that when we say the word freedom, it's usually what we're intending to talk about or intending to communicate. And that very simply is the power, or you could say the ability, or the right and the right to act, speak, or think as one wants, without hindrance or restraint. In the part of the world we live in, the country we live in, that's usually what we mean, something along those lines. Maybe you'd swap a word or two, but it's like, hey, it's kind of that idea of I may not agree with what you say, but I'll fight for your right to say it, right? That kind of like, this is what we fight for in this country. This is the value that's at the foundation of that. And I think that this definition is helpful. I think it's a really good starting point. There's actually some observations, some truisms we can make about freedom just from this definition. For example, built into this definition, this is really important, built into this definition is that unlimited freedom is ultimately an illusion. unlimited freedom, meaning that thing that might be spoken or sometimes unspoken, where we think we ultimately just want to be totally free, completely liberated to do whatever we want, whenever we want, with whomever we want, and have no consequences, not be judged, not experience shame or guilt. Built into that definition, that would say that type of freedom or that definition of freedom is an illusion. Because at the end, it says that there's no hindrances, right? Or there's no consequences. If we all did whatever we want, whenever we want, if we gave into all our feelings, desires, temptations, fantasies, if we gave into all of that, there would absolutely be consequences. There would be hindrances, perhaps legal ones, at least ones relationally with the people that matter most to us. We would experience that internal conflict as well. So we're not free to not have consequences in the world that we live in. Cause and effect just doesn't cease. And on the front end of that power or that idea to say, do you have the ability to do it? Well, part of this is just we have to admit that you and I are human beings, which means that we have limitations. I think sometimes when we talk about freedom, we almost talk about it in a way like we want to be our own God, that we want to be able to control every single circumstance of our life, right? And the reality is that we're humans, which means we have all kinds of limitations that are not even debatable limitations. It's not like, oh, if you work hard, you can achieve whatever. It's like, no, there's some things that we can't change. You can't change, for example, where you were born on planet Earth. You had no say over that or influence on that. What time in history you were born, your family of origin, or how it is that you were parented. You don't have unlimited energy. You have to eat and sleep or you will die, right? Your height, perhaps if I had eaten perfectly and slept perfectly growing up, I'd be 1 inch taller than I am. Not even in Marvel's multiverse could I be a center in the NBA, right? I was never going to be 7 feet tall, and I had no influence over that. I think about some talents and giftings, like I think about Michael Jordan on there. If you had me and Michael Jordan side by side and we had the exact same training, the exact same coaching, the exact same work ethic, we took the same number of shots and ate all the same foods, Michael Jordan would still beat me 10,000 out of 10,000 times in a game of one-on-one. Because there's a combination of an athleticism and a height and a gifting and a hand-eye coordination that he has that he combines with a work ethic to make him the second best basketball player of all time, right? So, sorry, I was born in Cleveland. Anyways, but you get my point right there, right? There are obviously a range of giftings that you see spread across people that we just don't have an influence over. So I think when we recognize that, the reason that's not just like theoretical about freedom, but really important to our lived experience is because if you don't know and recognize the things that are limiting, the things that we don't have control over, you will constantly be let down by your expectations of life, expectations of others, expectations of yourself. You'll feel a shame or a guilt that you're not enough when you think you should be able to be all places at all times and do all things, right? Every time you get on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok and you see an individual that can give all of their time and freedom to being fit and then all of their time to their family and all of their time to their business, and then you think you should have the time of all three of those and not think that somehow those are going to cross over or impact one another. It's so important to know what our limitations are because it's also equally important to know what the things are that we can influence. I would say a lot of us probably have a broken set of tapes or rules in our head just thinking, I will always, I will never. I constantly go back to that habit that is who I am. And we have that set of tapes in our head. We believe that we can't increase our freedom when in reality that's just not true. Freedom is not binary like that, right? It's not A or B, black or white. Sometimes we think we have it or we don't, when in reality it's something that can be increased and cultivated and we can have more of and that we can also restrict and have less of. So I think that's helpful when we look at the definition to talk about where we're going today. But there's one word in this definition that I take issue with that I think kind of breaks the whole thing down, that perhaps leads us to a type of freedom that isn't real freedom. And that one word is the word want, there in blue. The power, right to act, speak, or think is one wants without hesitation or without hindrance or restraint. And I am curious, like I would ask you, why is it that so often in our world and our culture and sometimes in the way we structure our own lives that we think if we could just be free to do whatever we want, that would be true freedom? Why is it that we think we really know what's best for our lives at all time, that we're this all-knowing, all-wise, all-powerful person? If you've ever had a friend date somebody that you know is no good for them, you know they can't see what's best for them because you can't talk to them in that honeymoon stage. There is nothing that you can do, but they're going to pursue what they want, and it's not going to be what's best for them. And we do that in all kinds of different areas of life, right? I think about there are times when my wants directly contradict one another. I literally can't have everything I want. I think about Monday of this week. I had an afternoon fast food kind of craving. I was at H-E-B. In one hand, somebody maybe saw me in the aisle. In one hand, I had hot fries. Don't judge me for that. You're free to have whatever your vice is. I haven't inherited Buck's love for Oreos, but for me, it's hot fries. In the other hand, I have my phone open to an app telling me what the nutrition is in those hot fries. Or you could say the facts about the lack of nutrition in those hot fries, right? And not only that, but it uses this nice little shame piece where it tells me exactly what I'm gonna weigh 5 weeks from now if I were to eat that every day. It's pretty effective. On Monday, the app won, and I put the hot fries back. On Thursday, I never even opened the app, and I got the hot fries because I'm smarter now. So there's this internal back and forth. I'm a bundle of paradoxes. There's all these things back and forth, and we all experience that principle on much bigger and broader things, that if I make this move financially, it's going to actually restrict my freedom financially later on, restrict my ability to be generous. If I make this move relationally, it's going to restrict my freedom in relationships. So is freedom really the ability to just chase after whatever we want? And why is it so infused in our culture? I mean, you think about a saying like this and where this comes from. The heart wants what it wants, right? Just do what makes you happy. Just like your heart will know, follow your heart. That phrase was first made popular when 56-year-old Woody Allen was talking about his affair with his 21-year-old stepdaughter, who he later married. And I'm not here to use the stage to judge. I just would acknowledge that for pretty much no worldview is that the standard of morality that humans should strive after. Right? But yet we get that and we hear that advice all the time. Or be true to yourself is another one, right? Maybe you've received that. Maybe you've given that advice with good intentions. Like, you just follow your heart. You know what's best. That was made famous by the fool in Hamlet. And this is the advice that we now give to one another today. Or Nike's Just Do It. That's now a cultural a cultural icon and kind of a rallying cry. That was made famous, the idea of just go for it, just experience it, don't think about it, just act. That was made famous, and the marketing teams talked about this. They were inspired by Gary Gilmore on death row for double homicide when asked if he had any last words. And he said, just do it. And now that's infused to our culture today. I mean, when you think about all of these different ideas, I think it's enough to pause and question, wait, where is that coming from? And is that true? And is that what real freedom actually looks like? Or is there something better? Is there an alternative? I think about what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians. He nailed this idea thousands of years ago. Apparently, this isn't a new thing to humans, right? It just manifests itself in different cultures. Paul said, you say, I am allowed to do anything, like anything is permissible, sure, but not everything is good for you. It's not going to work out the way you want it. You say, I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. It's not going to be the best part of your story. It's not going to necessarily increase your freedom just because you can do anything that you might want or that you might desire. So what I would like to do with our time, with kind of the second half of the conversation, is I would like to present an alternative option, maybe a different foundation or a different definition of freedom that we could perhaps pursue. And I think if you came in here today and you are a follower of Christ, I think this is probably the foundation, because it's what the scriptures paint as what real freedom is in a different context, in a different culture, what the authors thought about it, how they saw it, how they viewed it when they wrote about it. If you're not a Christian or you're trying to figure that out, or you're exploring, you have questions, I think equally this can still serve as an alternative to you. If the philosophy of kind of doing what you want, when you want, with whom you want hasn't necessarily always worked out so great, and you're wondering, is there something better out there? This might be an alternative for you. But the way that the scriptures talk about our freedom is they say there is something that we're trying to get rid of. There is something that enslaves us. There is something that controls us. But the enemy is not removing anything that kind of restricts our wants or desires, anything that gets in the way of that, or anything that tries to control us at all. That's not the real enemy. The enemy is one simple word, and that is sin. This is what binds us. This is what restricts us. Now, I know that's a loaded word based on your church experience and so on, but I would simply define it as missing the mark missing God's standard, because his standard is good, it's perfect, it's always best for us. It's not just a mistake, right? Sin is anti-good. It's the opposite of good. It breaks, it destroys, it always has consequences. And the way that the New Testament talks about it is not like, here's the list, right? Like, give me a list. What can I do? How close can I get to sin without actually sinning? It talks about it like it's this noun, like it's this disease or infection, like it's a force that works at the heart level and the mind level to twist the way that you see reality, to impact your very thoughts, which impact your actions, which leads to death of hopes and dreams and relationships. And Jesus clarifies this is for all of us what we start off enslaved to. He says in John 8, when he's having a conversation with the religious leaders and he's kind of correcting their ideas of the world and of God, he says, I tell you the truth, everyone who sins is a slave of sin. We are powerless. It drives us. It corrupts us. And its most effective tool is to distort what is reality, is to distort God's truth, is to distort who God says you are, who God says he is, to distort the way you see the people around you. If he can get you to believe untruths and start to act on those, or sin can get you to that, that's the most effective tool. It's the most effective way that it can impact us, right? And what that does, it elevates, because it kind of flips truth upside down, and it elevates something that's in the spot that should be God, and we chase after something that ultimately enslaves us as well. That doesn't mean that everything on this next wall here is bad, okay? But the process is bad of putting something ahead of God or before him. The process might be something like, man, now it's a career for me. Like, that's what I'm enslaved to. I make all my decisions off it. I make sacrifices based off of it. I sacrifice maybe what's most important in my life to get a title, or it's a dollar amount, right? It's the salary. I believe, like, if I just had enough, maybe it's not only just a greed thing, right? Which that can continue forever. That's an appetite. You know, when you're young, you just want another pair of shoes. The richest person in the world might be tempted to buy a second helicopter. I mean, it continues, that thing in each of us, right? But even more than greed, there's that desire to control our own world, to have enough money that no matter what happens to us, we can make sure we have our own security in our own hands. We can control our environment. Around us, there are things like experiences, things like political ideologies, things like fame and influence that we might say, that's what I'm striving after. If I get that, I'll be happy. There's even good things. There's good things that we're called to do that would be high on the priority list. Like if you're a parent, if you're a husband or wife, those are good things. But when we put those out of order and our identity rests in those, things get out of order and there are consequences that result. There are complications in those relationships as a result. But that's what sin is going to try to do. It's going to try to have anything but God at the top that we are ultimately subservient to instead. So what is the solution? What do we do, especially if the sin thing is bigger than us and more powerful than us and we've been struggling with it for a while? What do we do? Yet another reason I'm so proud to be an alumni of the University of Texas is that the answer is ingrained in the base of the UT Tower. And I would walk by it every single day throughout campus. John 8:32 is at the base of the UT Tower. It's in the same conversation of the scripture that we just looked at, and it's the King James Version, but it's the King James Version of this. Next slide, in John 8:32, it says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Which if you're new to church, you may not have known that was actually ascribed to Jesus first, but that concept is so brilliant. And I want you to think about it, even if you've heard that line before. It's so brilliant on Jesus' behalf because it's true at multiple levels, right? It's true at a lived experience level, and it's true at the most foundational level of the sin that we can't break of. What I mean is it's at a practical level. Sometimes we trip over the truth. There's something that changed our paradigm or the way that we see the world, and it's the starting point of experiencing real freedom. Maybe there really is that belief that if I can just get more, if I had a bigger number in the bank account, I would be happy, I would be safe, I would be secure. And then all of a sudden at some point in life, you look back 20, 30 years and you're like, I have way more than I did decades ago, and it's still not enough. Should I rethink this? And then you realize that real freedom in terms of our finances comes from understanding that it's not ours to begin with. We didn't make any of this world or this universe. We're not going to take it with us after we're gone. We're stewards. We are managers of. Some of that is for our enjoyment. Yes, absolutely, but we're just managers of something that ultimately doesn't belong to us. And the antidote to greed is actually generosity. Instead of being closed-fisted, to be open-handed with it. Well, based on how you've seen the world, you'd have all kinds of pushbacks to that and, all kinds, especially if you've had a bad church experience, oh, they just want my money. I mean, all that's going to come up from our lawyer. But what if that's true and it's the starting point of actually experiencing freedom financially? Relationally, I think about, the culture that we live in, this idea that there might be, some soulmate out there for you in the world. I'm not trying to make fun of you at all if that's the way you see the world. I just think about that. I'm like, man, I don't think there's anything remotely romantic about that. Like, what'd you do to find each other? We were born. Like, that was it. We didn't do anything else. I think it's way more inspiring the way the scriptures paint it to say, no. It is a commitment. It is an act of the will. A marriage covenant is a declaration before others and before God to say, I choose you and I deny all others. I was compatible with thousands, with millions, but I denied, and not that you had that many options, okay, let's be fair, but I denied all of those other options and I chose you. And I can't speak to wives, I'm not a wife, but to husbands, because I'm a husband, Jesus says the standard is to love your wife as Christ loved the church, which means to die for her, which means if I think something's wrong in my marriage because I'm not happy, because I think that's the end goal, I'm going to be forever let down in that cycle and circumstance. But if I just say, how can I leverage me for her in the same way that Christ leveraged himself for me? It's an unlocking, it's a truth that changes your fundamental perspective on the world and has the potential to bring real freedom for the things we desire most, real friendship, real intimacy, real connection. But the other layer of that, we give, a million examples. The other layer of that is not only is it true at a lived experience level, it's also true at the foundational level of this thing called sin that we've all fallen short. None of us can make up for this thing that is fundamentally broken between us and God. We're in sin. He is good and holy, can't be connected to that. And so Jesus is also saying at that level, at the eternity level, at the heaven-hell level, it is truth that sets you free. Only he's referring to himself when he makes that statement. In John 14, he says, I'm the way, I'm the truth, and I'm the life. He is the truth. And a couple of verses later after this, verse 32, he says, if the Son sets you free, you are truly free. In other words, it's not just information that sets us free. It's not just increased knowledge. That could be a starting point, but it's the journey of that knowledge from your head to your heart as you are connected to, not an idea, connected to a person. It is a personal relationship with Jesus. And as that grows in intimacy, and as you trust more of your life to him, you are actually set free as those ideas move to your heart and become the reality of your life. It's true in this life and in the next life. Jesus is so clear on it. I set you free. Staying connected to him sets you free. The scriptures are also so clear on why we are set free. And I think this is so countercultural as well. It's another thing that just might flip a worldview upside down. Paul clarifies in Galatians, he writes in Galatians 5:13, he says, for you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Don't go back to the very thing that enslaved you. You've been set free. You have a new identity now. Instead, use your freedom, what? To serve one another in love. That this cultural idea of freedom is just if I could totally pursue all my wants to be totally free, I picture this world where I can sit on a beach and drink a pina colada stress-free, and not that that's not a good thing. That is a good thing. But the idea that that's the end game of our freedom, no. We were set free for a purpose. We were set free so that when we really know our identity in Christ, we are now free to love others the way in which he loved us, which is why I think that's totally countercultural. Because I think in our world, our culture would say freedom is ultimately this. It's the ability to do what you want, with whom you want, whenever you want, for your benefit. Like, hey, just follow your own heart. And I'm sure we would never do anything that could possibly restrict our future freedoms. I'm sure we would never do anything that is actually not good for us in the long run. This is the cultural message. I think a much better alternative would be something like this: to deny what you think you want to get what you really want for the benefit of others. I kind of wanted to put and you in there, others and you, because yes, Jesus cares about your personal joy, your personal contentment. He says he wants you to have life and have it to the full. Yes, he cares about those things, but I'm just saying, I think when it's the only goal, you don't achieve it. When the goal is to love others, I think you actually end up getting both. So there's this denial aspect of it, but to me, that even still is not quite complete. It is a starting point, to say, what if my strongest desire isn't always my deepest desire, the biggest pull in a moment? What if that actually isn't what I'm really craving? But I think ultimately freedom really starts to happen, or ultimate freedom really starts to occur when in that connection with Jesus, your will begins to align with God's will. And when you align your will with God's will, the reason I phrase it that way is because I'm not trying to paint a picture where for the next 60 years, the Christian faith is just struggle. Like just struggle hard, like just white knuckle, like just, try and flex and put in a lot of effort. That's not what I'm saying. There are seasons of that to break free from things, yes. But the longer you're connected to the person of Jesus, the more it becomes, I see the world the way Jesus sees the world. I start to really see myself as he sees me. See God as he is. I see others as God says they are. And as I do that, it's like my genuine desire starts to line up with his desires, because his will is always what is best. It is always what is good. And my desire starts to become that. And so I start to look back over 5 years, over 10 years, over decades, and I start to think, it's not that the struggle is gone, but man, there are some things that had some weight, that had some power. There just was an energy in every room I, walked into that, a habit or an addiction I'm trying to break, that it's not that those things are maybe gone. Man, they have way less weight today. I am so much more free as a result of a connection to a person. Bottom line of what I'm trying to communicate of how these two types of freedoms are ultimately connected is that internal freedom cultivates external freedom. I didn't say it automatically leads to it, because the reality is the world that we live in is a chaotic one. It's an unpredictable one. We are not in heaven yet. That's really important to remember. This world is not heaven. So yes, there can be things that happen to you regardless of what you do that you have no control over. But your best shot to experience freedom in your relationships, freedom in your life, freedom in the things that are most important to you is to cultivate this internal freedom, because we can influence that regardless of the external world around us, as we stay connected to the one who is the source of freedom. This idea was made just so abundantly clear to me and in such a powerful way a couple months ago when I got to hear in person the story of a couple that just has a 1 in a billion type story. I was introduced to their story a couple of years ago. Maybe some of you were as well in 2020 when a documentary came out about them. It's called Outcry, and it's now an Emmy Award-winning documentary, and it's about a story that took place right here in Leander, Texas, so right here locally. And it's the story of a young man, Greg Kelly, who you see there, who was falsely accused and wrongly convicted of a crime that he didn't commit, and he ended up spending 3 years in prison for it. He was sentenced to 25 years, which I think is equally important because we didn't know how the story was going to end as it was going, right? Sentenced to 25 years. And as a result, right, the external freedoms, all of the external freedoms of his life are taken away. He's a star football player at Leander. He has all these D1 scholarships. He loses those scholarships, loses the ability to go to school, loses his reputation, right? And then loses his physical freedom as he is imprisoned. I said at the beginning, like that's the most extreme version of losing our external freedoms. His then girlfriend, now wife, Gabrielle, has a similar journey of losing all kinds of external freedoms and her reputation and her dreams. She was a prolific dancer, and she actually made an NFL cheerleading team with the Chargers and cheered with them for a while. And one day somebody pulls her aside and says, hey, you need to take everything about Greg, your boyfriend, off of your Instagram, your social media, and you should probably change your name so it doesn't show up in Google searches with him anymore. She said, I can't do that. I can't go through with that and abandon. It's not the right thing because he's innocent, because I love this individual. A couple months ago, I got to sit down with them. We have a project at Northpoint called Story 512, where we tell the stories of people in Austin that inspire us in hope of inspiring others. And we got to have a conversation about some of the things that were happening behind the scenes, some of their experiences. And I was reminded again and again and again of this theme consistent in their life, because if anybody had a reason to throw in the towel, to be bitter about the world, to lose trust with people, to stop fighting, I mean, it would be these two. They've been let down by pretty much everybody. But that's not what they did. Greg talked about how he was in prison. He was like, I was unwilling to be poisoned by it because I saw so many people around me poisoned by it. He's like, but if I did that and I gave into that and I became bitter, then I wouldn't be the man that Gabriel would want to be with. I would lose what matters most to me. It was in prison that he became a follower of Christ. He said he read the Bible cover to cover 3 times in his first couple months there, mostly because he said he was so bored. He said he read that and Nicholas Sparks books, because that brought hope where he was. And that was the material for all kinds of letters he was writing back and forth with Gabriel over that time period. And they chose to cultivate a friendship. She chose not to walk away, but cultivate a friendship and a depth of relationship that most people don't experience before marriage, at least anymore in our culture. He made the decision despite legal counsel to say, hey, what if you just plead guilty and you get a lesser sentence and you get some probation time? And he said, I can't do that because I'll lose my internal peace, my internal freedom. If I say I did something I didn't do, I couldn't live with myself, so I can't. And he made that decision, which ultimately kept the fight alive and kept the fight going. He talked about taking every thought captive for Christ. Think about how many thoughts you would have a day in that situation, that environment, how angry you would be with God in that scenario. He talked about the process of taking every thought captive. If you watch the documentary or if you watch the Story 512 episodes and conversations, the moment where they talk about the external freedom being granted is an unbelievable moment. In Texas, that rarely happens, right? They had 2 years out of prison. Greg had 2 years out of prison before he would know if he was going to actually be exonerated or go right back to prison. Only about 200 people have ever been exonerated in Texas of all of the people who have ever been in prison. And not only was he exonerated, they had to check every Wednesday for 2 years on a website, but he was the first ever, historic case, the first ever where all 9 justices on the Court of Criminal Appeals said he's innocent. That's never happened before. You just need a majority, 5 of the 4. And there was a lady who's never exonerated anybody. He was the very first one. They talk about running through New York and leaving their stuff behind in the moment and the weight of, I'm finally free after this 6-year process and so many things that have been taken away that can never come back again. But they talk about this exhilarating freedom of actual, genuine freedom. And it's able to be received because of the internal freedom that they cultivated. But I want you to look at the way Greg very simply, like it was just to me so authentic, describes what the freedom or what the experience was like as he realizes this decision has been made. He said that day, when he was granted his freedom, he said there was nothing that was going to destroy what we were feeling that day. There was nothing external that could possibly mess with what was happening internally. The reconciliation, and this is what I thought was so amazing. He said, I wasn't worried about anything. There was no regret. It was just, let's get home and be with the people we love, and let's celebrate. That's somebody who has experienced both internal and external freedom. It wasn't, I'm free, I'm gonna go live it up. It wasn't, I'm free, I'm gonna go make up for all this lost time. It wasn't, I'm gonna go get all the people that I'm angry at. He was like, no, I'm free. I'm free internally because of my relationship with Christ. I'm free externally now. And as a result, it's not about me. I just wanna go be with the people that I love. They're both business owners now. They're both investing in the next generation. It's just so inspiring, the whole story. But the reason I share that story is because I know that I don't know all of your stories. I just know that you have one. And I don't know what is happening externally in your world right now. I don't know what situation at home. I don't know what relationship. I don't know what professionally. I don't know what financially or what habit or addiction. I don't know what the thing is that feels like it has a hold on you, that if you could just be free of this, you would arrive at this. And my intention is not to minimize any of those things. I'm just saying, even in the most extreme, like the story of Greg and Gabriel, in the most extreme freedoms externally being removed, we still have the opportunity to pursue internal freedom by staying connected to the source of freedom, the person of Jesus. So my questions for you, just for reflection at the end of our time, are very simply these. Are you making any decisions with your freedom today that are actively restricting your freedom tomorrow? Are you doing anything that's just like, hey, I can do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, but you already know you're restricting areas in the most important areas of your life later on? Does anything come to mind for you? Are you searching? Are you searching for freedom in anything besides the one that can bring you true freedom? Is your hope that you will discover this thing or achieve this thing or accomplish this thing or be recognized for this thing or fix this one problem and then you'll be truly free? Or do you realize it's available to you right now, today, here in this moment in the person of Jesus? Is the end goal of your freedom for your benefit or for those around you? when you picture being free of the situation, when you picture being free of that habit internally, whatever it may be, do you picture just your personal happiness, or do you picture the way that you'd now be able to be more free, to be with, to love, to support those around you in the same way that Jesus has first loved you? And this last question is specifically for those of you who you came into here today and you would say you are a Christian, that you are a follower of Christ. This question is specific for you, and my ask is, have you ever actually experienced the freedom of Christ? Not just do you know about it, not could you summarize it for me or give me the Bible verses. I mean, have you experienced the moment, whether small and unlocking the bathroom door or big and unlocking the jail cell? Have you ever experienced that moment of I am completely and totally free? I am forgiven, washed white as snow. Paul wrote about half of his New Testament letters from a jail cell and described what real freedom and real joy in Christ actually looks like. Have you experienced that? Say, I am a new creation. I am free now to experience peace with who I am in Christ. And as I stay connected to him as the greatest experience in the world, that manifests itself into those around me. That's my desire for each and every one of us, that it's not just something that's here, but it's something that makes its way to our heart. And it's something that we actually genuinely experience in a very personal, very intimate relationship with Jesus. Would you guys pray with me? Father, as we reflect on freedom throughout this weekend, we are so grateful that freedom starts and ends with you. Father, the true freedom we're chasing for is found in relationship with you. Thank you that you grant us it. Thank you that our lives have meaning and purpose because of it. You've called us to something great with the freedom you've given us. Father, for a lot of us, this brings up stories, this brings up memories, this brings up struggles, and I just ask, you're big enough to meet us in all of those. And would you show us, if we've never experienced it before, if we've just known of it, we just heard of it, would you help us to truly experience what freedom looks like in Jesus? Father, we love you. We need you, and it's in Jesus' name that we pray. You guys have an amazing rest of your July 4th weekend. Thanks for hanging with us, and we'll see you next week.